Welcome. Thanks for clicking on this video.
Hi, my name is Catherine Hubert. This is my business, Chez Genèse, where I am the restaurant owner, chef, and disability integration coach.
I'm really excited today to be talking to you about 10 principles for disability justice. That does not mean that these are the only 10 principles or that in 10 years I won't look back on this video and think, wow, there are a lot of things that I missed or that I wasn't aware of. I am growing and learning in this space. It's something that I practice and I think about and I apply on a daily basis. And in any type of social justice work, things are changing, they're evolving, we're growing and learning together. So I want to preface this video by saying that I'm aware of that. And also, not every business or organization that is pushing for disability employment is also promoting disability justice, which is why we are talking about it today. My hope through my business is that we're doing both. We have an integrated hiring model, which means that 50% of my team is disabled and 50% of my team is non-disabled. And by having that integrated team, there are thoughts, questions, social problems that we get to tackle together as a team. And it's so exciting to get to welcome and invite you into that community over this wonderful platform of YouTube. So welcome. Thanks for being here today. Let's dive right in. Number one, we need to acknowledge that bias around disability does exist. Before we can really step deeper into the work of disability justice and what that looks like in our communities, what that looks like in our workplaces, in our social settings, in our world, we need to get real with the fact that bias around disability does exist. As long as we are pretending or avoiding doing the work of actually examining the bias that's in us, the bias that we see in our culture, we're only going to get so far. There's a lot of different biases, but one of the biggest biases that I see having a business that has a focus towards equal employment for people with disabilities is this belief that a disabled person is less capable or they're less qualified of either doing a job in the first place or doing a job well. There's a belief that someone without a disability is inherently or naturally going to be better at a job than a person with a disability, and that's just simply not true. This shows up in big and small ways. Some of the smaller, sneakier ways are people saying, I love what you're doing through your business, and the food's actually really good, or the service is good. It's like this question mark of, you hire people with disabilities, we weren't actually expecting the concept, the food, the service, etc., to be good. And so we're wanting to break that part of my goal in having a restaurant was having a really great restaurant, not having anyone on my team feel like they had a second-rate job by any means or that they were being given less than, because then that's not really an equal opportunity, and that's also not me standing behind the belief that I have, which is people with disabilities are just as qualified as people without disabilities in getting a job. It just doesn't mean that every person with a disability or every person without a disability is going to be a good fit for my specific place of business. Number two, one of my favorite points from the book, Demystifying Disability, this one right here, is that if you know one person with a disability, then you truly know one person with a disability. Remembering that each person, disability or not, is unique. They're their own person, their life experiences, their stories, their disability, all of that is going to show up differently in their life because of the life that they have, the people that are in their lives, the experiences that they've had, the barriers that they've experienced, etc. It's going to look different. So remembering that as we're getting to know people, if disability disclosure is something that has happened, that's an invitation to get to know that person better and not place this broad assumption over that person because of the disclosure or information that was provided. Number three, disability is not a bad word. One of the things that is most surprising when I do workshops and I'm talking to other businesses and organizations is you can see the look on people's faces when I say disability or disabled. It's kind of this wide-eyed, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that we could say that. Why are you saying that? And I even have people tell me in workshops like, well, I don't like to use that word. And then that provides an opportunity to go back and talk about why. Then what are our beliefs around disability for us to get to a place where we don't feel like the word itself is okay to use or to speak into existence. And a lot of times that stems back from this idea or bias that there's something wrong with disability in the first place, that it's bad, that someone is automatically going to feel ashamed or less than if we use the word disability in association with them, when the reality is there's nothing wrong with being disabled. So there's nothing wrong with using the term disability. It's perfectly okay and it's perfectly human to not be able to do something, which is what the word is suggesting in the first place. Our humanity is not based off of what we can do or what we contribute, which is another topic in and of itself, but it's an important clarification to make. Number 4. Branching off of number 3, it's important that we talk about disability. Anytime there's a lot of silence around something culturally, it projects this idea that there's something not okay or taboo about that topic in the first place. So it's important that we are incorporating more conversation around disability into our lives. Whether you are disabled or non-disabled watching this video, it's important to talk about it more. And that's for many different reasons. One is just to bring something out of the shadows and into the center and be like, it's okay and actually good for us to be having conversations about this because it impacts and affects a lot of people in our world. It doesn't need to be something that's left off the table or left out of conversation, but it also is a part of raising awareness and increasing our understanding around something, which goes back to that first point of we then start to recognize some of the bias or the beliefs that we have around something, and it gives us an opportunity to actually shift and to change those. Understanding is really empowering, and I have worked with people on my team who are disabled, who didn't grow up with there being conversation or dialogue around their disability and what that meant for them, who are then discovering aspects of themselves at a later point in life that they really could have benefited from understanding or bringing conversation or community around earlier. I remember very early on in starting this restaurant, one of my employees who is autistic saying that he was learning about autism in one of his college courses, and he was like, I understand things about myself that I never understood. He was like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm autistic. So much of the way that my brain works, I didn't realize was because of autism, because nobody was talking about it. And it was so exciting to see him get excited about learning about his own brain and how that impacted his life. And it also made me really upset on his behalf that nobody had taken the time to have those conversations with him earlier. And a lot of times I think that's because parents or teachers don't want to place an identity or a stigma on someone at an early point in your life, but you can talk about something without placing stigma on it. In fact, talking about it is part of removing the stigma that oftentimes gets placed. Number 5, focus on your community and area of impact. Anytime you're working on any kind of social justice, it can feel really overwhelming because there's so much that we want to see change in our world. Most of us don't have access to the entire world. Our communities are much smaller than that. But those smaller communities is where we can see a lot of change and growth happen because your level of impact in those areas is so much higher. So taking advantage of that, leveraging the relationships and the opportunities and the voices and the ears and the relationships that you have for the things that you believe in is really impactful. Number 6, remember that disability is a possibility for any person at any point in your life. Yes, sometimes disability occurs at birth, but it can occur at any point in our life stage and to any person. A lot of times we have this idea that disability really only impacts a small group of people, which one is not true. It actually impacts a fairly large percentage of people, but it also is not something that's outside of or exterior to ourselves. Disability can happen in our natural aging process. It can happen due to an accident or changes that might happen at other points in our life, a cancer diagnosis, a car accident, etc. So not only, this is something that I talk about with groups, and it sometimes feels a little bit funny to turn it in towards self, but there is wisdom in understanding that disability doesn't just impact someone else, it also very likely may impact us at some point in our lives. So it's something to be taken seriously, not just for the ways that justice will impact people who are currently in a disability experience, but also setting up a world where it could impact us at some point in the future. Chez Genèse teammates, your keyword this week is justice, keeping with the theme. Number 7, we need to place responsibility where responsibility truly lies. What do I mean by this? Well, there are 3 different things that I'm thinking of when I say that. Number 1 is our society. A lot of times, responsibility that really is the responsibility of our society gets placed back onto the person with a disability. Some things that fall under that umbrella are accommodations, structure of buildings and businesses, and inclusion. So, structure, how our buildings are constructed, are they accessible for people in wheelchairs? Are they accessible for people who are deaf? Are they accessible for people who are blind? For some of the more physical disabilities that we think of, but also even just sensory related disabilities, making sure that our businesses, our organizations are set up to be accessible to people with disabilities. That's a societal thing. That's not something that needs to be placed back onto a person with a disability. The same with accommodations and inclusion. Those need to be taken on as a responsibility by businesses, organizations, governments, schools, etc., and not something that should be left up to a person with a disability to have to fight for, to advocate for, to push for, or to just have to learn to do without because someone wasn't willing to go to the time to think outside the box, to be willing to see that there's another way to do something, etc. Secondly, non-disabled humans. I am non-disabled. If you are non-disabled and you are watching this video, then we need to take on the emotional and the mental labor required to get to understand where someone who has a different life experience than us, who has a different brain than us, to understand where they are coming from, instead of what typically happens in our world is that non-disabled humans are asking disabled humans to do the bulk of that emotional and mental labor, oftentimes looking like we're asking disabled humans to conform to a non-disabled identity or status as much as possible. And that's just fucked up. Number 3 of point number 7 is if you're a disabled human, then your responsibility is to understand your rights, to provide disclosure where you feel like that's safe and appropriate, and to request accommodations, again, where you feel like that's safe and appropriate. I encourage independence in this. That's something that I feel like sometimes gets missed in the process, and not in I'm blaming the disability community for that as a whole. I think a lot of that is because of the way that society robs people with disabilities of their independence, but I think that's an area where ground can be reclaimed, and understanding rights, providing disclosure, requesting accommodations. I recognize it's not always safe to do that, and that is, again, a societal problem. When we go back to society needs to take on the responsibility of providing accessibility, accommodations, and inclusion. But as we continue to push forward in those things, that is one piece that I think can fall under the umbrella of responsibility for someone with a disability. Number 8, all of these are important, and this one's really important. Consent is key. Consent, it's not something that I think we talk about enough culturally, but especially not in terms of disability and what it looks like to push against the assumption that every disabled person wants or needs the help of a non-disabled person. That's not true. It's not a blanket statement, but we also don't need to take away someone's humanity by not even giving them the opportunity to say yes or no. We need to ask before we just offer help. Even if the person is nonverbal and is not in a position to give a verbal response, we still need to go through the steps of acknowledging that they are another human being who does have thoughts, who does have feelings, and even if we are not able to receive or understand what they might be communicating, that doesn't mean that we skip this step. Verbal communication is not the only form of communication, so paying attention to people's body language, to their anxiety levels, to the energy that they are projecting, all of those things can be really important aspects of understanding where another person is coming from. And a good rule of thumb is when you're asking if someone would like help, whether that's would you like help opening the door? Would you like me to help you? Especially if it means touching another person, which is not something that maybe comes up a lot, but if it does, making your best guess as to what the person is communicating, and then still you doing the step of communicating, okay, I'm going to touch your arm as I help you get out of the car. Like all of those things, just providing and showing respect for the other person and how our actions might be impacting them, and also coaching through so that that safety and trust hopefully can stay intact. Number 9, especially if you are an employer, you need to pay people with disabilities who are our employees. Labor is labor and time is time, period. A lot of times, positions for people with disabilities are volunteer positions, or they are the lowest paid positions, or they are the positions that let go first when it's time to let someone go. All of this implies that a person with a disability's time is less valuable or is less important than a person without a disability. And then there's this attitude or feeling that a business, especially if it's run by a non-disabled person, is really benevolent or generous if they're providing a space for a disabled person to work. But if a disabled person is working, no matter what that job is, they need to be compensated for it because it's their time. They're still spending their time. Again, regardless of what the task is, regardless of what the position is, their time is valuable. They're still spending their time at your place of employment, which means they should be compensated for their time. So that's one of my biggest soapboxes. It's one of the things that probably makes me the most frustrated. And that's not even getting into how low is the ceiling set for people with disabilities? Do we offer an opportunity for them to grow in responsibilities, to grow in their pay, etc., which are all still important things, and we will talk about that in a different video, but just bringing it back to baseline. Number 1, pay your employees, period. Disability or not. Time is important. Disability or not. Pay your people. Lastly, number 10, be the shoulders for someone else to stand on. If you are a non-disabled person and you are watching this video and you are pushing for disability justice, it means that right now in our world, you have power and you have privilege that most people with disabilities don't have. Use that power and use that privilege for good and provide shoulders for someone else to stand on, meaning that you are pushing the needle forward, you are making a change so that someone can come behind you and they can push it further. All right, that's what myself and my buddy Post Malone have for you today. Questions, comments, thoughts, any points that you want to add to this, anything that you want to call me out on, please throw it in the comments below. I'll see you next time.